Spice Math. That's right. You add it up, multiply it, man. Spice Math. Okay. A couple things we're gonna learn today. Spice Math. All right. Take some time, educate yourself. Spice Math. That's right. You won't believe it's just math. Come on.
Hi, I'm Ruth Doughton.
Hi, I'm Aaron Williams.
Hi, I'm Brandon Alexander.
Hi, I'm Kelvin Doughton.
Hello, I'm Lyndon Sincere.
We are your Spice Math tutors.
You won't believe it's just math. Just math.
Hello again. Today, we welcome you another time to Spice Math, and we'll be looking at decimal fractions. Today's lesson will be targeting Form 3s and Form 4 students who may need a review on how to manipulate decimal fractions. At the end of the lesson today, you would be able to define what a decimal fraction is. You'll be able to convert a decimal fraction back to a common fraction. That's those with numerators and denominators. You should be able to add and subtract decimal fractions. And you'll also be able to multiply decimal fractions and to divide decimal fractions using a non-calculator method. For today's lesson, you will need to have some paper, pencils, a pen, and maybe a calculator just to double check your work. So let's see. What is a decimal fraction? In a previous lesson, we looked at the meaning of the decimal system, and we defined that the decimal point, or the dot, separates whole numbers from fractions. So a number like 1.4 on the left-hand side, you will find the whole number, and on the right-hand side of the point, in this case, the number 4, would be the decimal. But what we want to do today is to take a look at what really is a decimal fraction. Now, the definition for a decimal fraction is a little wordy, but it's worth remembering. A decimal fraction is a fraction whose denominator is some power of 10, usually indicated by a dot or a point, written before the numerator. So the decimal point is written before the numerator. The number on the board happens to mix a whole number and a decimal fraction. In today's lesson, we want to look at those that are fractions only. So 0.8, what does it mean? That's a decimal fraction because the whole number is 0. And the number on the right-hand side of the point, which is 8, implies, as we said in the previous lesson, a negative power of 10. But there's a quick way we can convert this decimal fraction back to a common fraction with a numerator and a denominator. According to the definition, the denominator of this fraction is a power of 10. In this case, because it's the first position, the power of 10 is 1 or negative 1. That's what makes it a fraction. So 10 goes in the numerator because 8 is in the first position. And the decimal point comes immediately before the numerator. So that gives me 8 over 10. We can now reduce this common fraction to its lowest terms. Four-fifths. So we've seen from the example that we can change 0.8, which is a decimal fraction, back to a common fraction with a numerator and a denominator. But let's look at another example. 0.56. Now we have two positions. So the denominator will now be 10 to the power of 2 or 100. So this number is 56 over 100. Do you see a pattern? Suppose we had a decimal fraction with 3 places, 0.729. What do you think the denominator of that fraction would be? Well, you guessed it. It would be 10 to the power of 3 or 1,000. So this number as a decimal fraction is really 729 over 1,000. So clearly, we see how you can quickly convert a decimal fraction to a common fraction. That is, a fraction that has a numerator and a denominator. Let's take it one step further. Let's suppose you wanted to add decimal fractions. What would be the steps for adding decimal fractions? Well, there are basically 2 steps. And those steps apply for both addition and subtraction. If you're going to add or subtract decimal fractions, the position of the point is absolutely important. In fact, it is said that you need to put point on the point. So in this case, if I'm setting this question down, I'm going to put 0.85, I'm adding, plus 0.2134. So observe the position. The position of the point must be placed immediately under the point, the number above. And this rule always applies when you're adding or you're subtracting decimal fractions. So let's add. There is no number at the top, so that's 0 plus 4, 0 plus 3, 5 plus 1, 6, 8 plus 2 is 10. So 0 comes here, and the 1 is carried over here. So the answer is now 1.0634. We've added 2 decimal fractions. Let's suppose we had to subtract. Once again, the rule applies. If you're subtracting decimal fractions, when you're setting it down, you must place point under point. So, and now comes the interesting part. How do we subtract these 2 decimal fractions, or rather one from the next, when there is no position immediately above the 6? Well, we can insert a 0 there and subtract. 0 take away 6. No, it's not 6. We'd have to move to the other column and use the decomposition strategy, or we can borrow and add the 10 that we borrowed to the previous column. Now we can subtract. So 10 take away 6 is 4, 8 take away 5 is 3, 8 take away 1 is 7, point on the point. Answer 0.734. That's for adding and subtracting decimal fractions. Ensure you place point on the point, otherwise your answer would be wrong. But what happens when we multiply decimal fractions? Let's see. (0.5) multiplied by 1.6. Or let's stick to fractions. Let's call it 0.6. When you're multiplying decimal fractions, the first step is to ignore the point, and the second step is to multiply the numbers as if there were no point whatsoever. So in this case, we could Say this is like 5 times 6, which is 30. Now comes the challenging part. We have to replace the point we ignored initially into the answer. So first step, ignore the point. Second step, multiply as normal. Third step, replace the point in the answer. How do we do that? We first go to the original question, and the total amount of decimal places in the original question is what will be placed in the answer. There is 1 decimal place here, 1 decimal place here. So that means we have a total of 2 decimal places. We now count from the right. 1, 2. That's 0.3. 0.3 is the result of multiplying 0.5 by 0.6. What are the steps again? First, you ignore the point. Second, you multiply as normal. And third, you replace the point with the same number of decimal places you had in the original question. Right? And this can be done with any decimal. Let's try another one. Let's suppose we had this time 1.7 multiplied by 0.4. Using the steps explained previously, we can simply ignore the point and multiply 17 by 4. How much do we get from that? 4 7s, 28, 4 1s, 4 and 2, 68. Now we are ready to apply step 3. Replace the point in the answer, considering the total amount of places we had in the question originally. So 1 place, 1 decimal place, so that's 2. We count in from the right. 1, 2. So the point falls here. So the actual answer is 0.68. So now we've seen how to multiply decimals following 3 easy steps with or without the calculator. The next challenge is to divide decimals, because now we're going to split it into 2 sections. The first section is, if we have a division problem that says 7.5 divided by 6, we will identify the dividend and the divisor. And these are problems sometimes that create a lot of challenges, because sometimes students are confused about what to do. If the dividend and the divisor both contain decimals, then that would take us to second section. Here we're looking at first section. If the divisor is a whole number, no change needs to be done. You simply divide as normal. In this case, the dividend is 7.5. It's a decimal, yes. It contains a decimal fraction, yes. The divisor is the one on the right. It's a whole number. Does it contain a decimal? No. Division as normal. That's the rule. If the divisor is a whole number, regardless to what the dividend is, you divide as normal. No changes. So we're going to put 7.5 here and 6 out here, and let's divide. 6 into 7, 1 point. 1 by 6 is 6. 7 take away 6 is 1. Carry down the 5. 6 into 15 is 2. 2 by 6 is 12. Subtract 3. You can add a 0 because we've already passed the point. 6 into 30, 5. 5 by 6, 30. So the answer when we divide 7.5 by 6 is 1.25. That was simple. Simply because the divisor was a whole number. The next example, we're going to see what would happen if the divisor is not a whole number. So here again, we have a problem. 1.28 divided by 0.2. Is the divisor a whole number? No. That is when changes have to be made. What we need to do is we will make the divisor a whole number by applying a multiple of 10, or as we say, by moving the point in a certain direction. So this question becomes 1.28 divided by 0.2. Because the divisor is a decimal fraction, we are going to convert the divisor to a whole number by moving the point one place to the right. If we move the point one place to the right, 0.2 becomes 2. But since we've made that change to the divisor, we must do likewise in the dividend. How many places did we move the point in the divisor? One place to the right. So we do the same in the dividend. One place to the right. So we get 12.8. Now the question has changed slightly, but in the correct proportion. We now have 12.8 divided by 2. The divisor is no longer a decimal. Division can take place normally. So, 12.8 divided by 2. 2 into 1 is 0, 2 into 12, 6. Put your point, 2 into 8, 4. Answer, 6.4. So we see clearly that the challenge with dividing decimals comes mainly when the divisor is a decimal, or rather when the divisor is a decimal fraction, or if it contains decimals. When the divisor is not a decimal or does not contain decimal fractions, as we saw in example 1, there is no need for changes. You divide as normal. However, when the divisor is a decimal fraction or contains decimals, then you need to make the shift, turn the divisor into a whole number, and the same method that you use to make the divisor a whole number, that must be done to the dividend. Then you can divide normally. Thank you very much. In today's lesson, you learned how to define a decimal fraction. You learned how to convert a decimal fraction to a common fraction. You learned how to add and subtract decimal fractions, how to multiply decimals, and also how to divide in the two scenarios represented, when the divisor is a decimal fraction and when it is a whole number. Thank you very much.
You won't believe it's just math. Come on.